Minister, Mr John Penrose.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm going to try and address a series of specific points which various different people have made during the course of this debate, and then I will also try and address some of the broader questions, some of them quite fundamental, about the RHI scheme and its many and manifest problems and shortcomings as well. Partly because they've been raised in the second reading debate just now, but also partly because I know we're going to go on and consider an amendment in the committee stage in a minute. I just thought it would help to have a sort of a bigger shared fact base. It won't answer all the questions which will then be rightly raised in the committee stage, quite rightly, but it may at least lay the foundations of that debate and help us to address it at that stage. So we have, I think the honourable lady from East Bristol rightly said, had quite a narrow debate, although widely shared views across the House, but not a broad-ranging debate. She's absolutely right to say. But I should start by saying I strongly agree with one point which she made right at the end of her remarks just now, which is that it's easy to forget, in amongst all the concern about the flaws in the RHI scheme, that it is actually it was introduced for a very noble purpose. It was introduced as part of an attempt to decarbonise our economy, to increase the amount of renewable energy in Northern Ireland, and this is part of a sort of broader tapestry of other initiatives which are being introduced right the way across the UK and indeed in other countries around the world. This is something which we clearly should not lose sight of. It's a vitally important point. And I see the gentleman from East Antrim. I'll happily give way.
It's rather ironic that a scheme which is meant to decarbonise, and for some people that's important, for other people it's just an expensive burden on the economy. But you don't think it's rather ironic that a scheme such as that finishes up with boilers in the United Kingdom burning wood which is put into pellet form in North America, brought in ships across the Atlantic Ocean, and then burnt in boilers here in the United Kingdom? Does he really think that that's a way of cutting down carbon emissions?
Deputy Speaker, the honourable gentleman also made the point that he wasn't quite sure why burning wood was any better than burning other things because the emissions are similar. If my honourable friend from Richmond was here, he would make the point that we have to be extremely careful about how we calculate what the carbon footprint of some of these supposedly renewable fuels might be. Because if you cut down virgin rainforest in order to grow things which are then pelletised and burnt, then the overall genuine carbon footprint is much worse than people like to pretend. However, I would just point out to him again that if the honourable gentleman from Richmond was here, he would make a sharp distinction between, I think it's called short cycle carbon and long cycle carbon, i.e. fossil fuels, where carbon has been locked away for millions of years, is a net release which makes an overall difference to the level of carbon. Short cycle carbon stuff which has just grown in the course of our lifetimes and is then burnt is a sort of short-term recycling. But I will not, Madam Deputy Speaker, tempt your patience too much by going into the details of the level of greenery, but I hope we can all agree at least that it is a noble purpose which this scheme was intended to pursue with all its manifest flaws. Can I quickly, though, before I go on to the details of the RHI scheme itself, address one or two other points, because the honourable gentleman from East Belfast asked a series of questions about housing associations and Northern Ireland housing associations, and I think was hoping to pin us down a little bit about when a piece of legislation might be introduced. And I just wanted to reassure him. I think my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, made this point, but just to sort of repeat it nonetheless, to tie it down, the government will take this forward as soon as parliamentary time allows. Now, the honourable gentleman, the Labour spokesperson, in his opening remarks, also asked a question about the Towns Fund, and I think he also mentioned that he didn't feel he had quite enough of an answer in our discussions yesterday. So I wanted to make sure we tried to do this today. Now, he will be aware that the Secretary of State for Communities made an announcement yesterday. I can advise that the Treasury will apply Barnett in the normal way and will confirm what the funding for each region will be in due course. We don't know that yet, but it will come out. And we will seek to ensure that towns in Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland can benefit, building on the success of the government's growth and city deals. He also asked what are the applicable costs of the RHI scheme. And as I said, I'll address that specific item now if I can before I come on to the broader points. Now, the scheme guidance, which I'm sure we all are itching to go through in huge detail, but the scheme guidance is published. It sets out clearly what the eligible costs are. They're primarily the costs of the boiler, but he mentioned things to do with installation costs and pipework and the like, and some of those are included as well. Interest costs on borrowing are apparently not included as an eligible cost on this scheme, but I just wanted to share that with everybody here before we get on to the committee stage of our discussions, just so that that is a sort of shared fact base for us all before we get into the detail on the amendment which has been tabled by the chairman of the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee. And the honourable lady from North Down also asked about the upfront payments and how they would be calculated for people who were wanting to opt out of the scheme because they felt that if they remained in the scheme that they would lose out too badly. So I think there were some questions. It may not have been her, but there were certainly questions posed by either her or one of her near neighbours about how those calculations would be made and how those costs would be done for anybody who wanted to opt out of the scheme. What would the calculation be? And very straightforwardly, what will happen is that an individual's costs will be calculated, so that means that the costs of installation and so on and so forth on the capital cost, the boiler and other eligible installations and running costs will all be included, and then they will be reimbursed up to the 12% return, which is the target rate of return for the revised scheme. So all the additional costs of the renewable technology above a fossil fuel one will be reimbursed for them. And that, I think, is crucial because a number of colleagues during the course of this evening's debate have raised the question about what happens to those people who are worried they're going to lose out. In fact, I think the honourable gentleman from Strangford read out an email which he'd had from someone with precisely those concerns. And the answer is that if they are concerned that it will no longer be economic for them to stay in the scheme, that's what they can do. It will be a sort of free option for them. They're guaranteed, therefore, to have made 12% on their money if they decide to opt out at that stage. And there's a couple of people wanting to catch my eye. Can I start with the...
Thank you. I'm very grateful to the Minister. The Minister needs to address the point that was raised by a number of honourable and right honourable members, and that is in relation to legitimate expectation. The legitimate expectation of those who in good faith entered this scheme in the expectation it would last for 20 years with a particular tariff. How does the government square that and address that really key point?
Very happy to address that point, Madam Deputy Speaker, because one of the things which I know a number of people have found shocking, and in fact I think that the honourable gentleman from East Antrim, if I'm probably slightly misquoting him, but broadly speaking I think he said, he was right to say, I think, that the RHI scheme as it was originally conceived has turned out, in spite of everyone's best efforts, to be both a failure and a disgrace. And I think he is very sadly but absolutely accurately describing what happened there. And I think it's also true to say that a number of people, and again this is a point made by the honourable gentleman from Strangford, a great many people didn't go into the scheme with the intention of abusing it at all. Some of them were pastors in churches and so on and so forth. He's quite right to make that point. It was introduced for a good reason. It was entered into by people, in the vast majority of cases, for good reasons. The thing which I found, therefore, pretty shocking, and I'm sure other people will share my shock at this, is that of the people who have been involved in this, and many of them with all the right intentions, as we've just described, 80% of the participants have already received 12% returns for the entire 20 years of the scheme by today. If they didn't get another penny piece, Madam Deputy Speaker, they would have already received 12% return on their money by now. Even if there was still another 14 years or however many years of the scheme there is left to run since the day that they entered, they would have made 12% by today. So the honourable lady is absolutely right to raise the question about legitimate expectations, but they have done incredibly well. And I would just remind people that while this is something which is supposed to have a return of, on average, 12%, and I'll come to the honourable gentleman if I can, this is something which is supposed to have, on average, a 12% return, as it was originally conceived. The actual rate of return, on average, of people who have been in the scheme already has been 50%, Madam Deputy Speaker. 50% return on your money. Now, that is extraordinary, particularly when you consider that that is money which comes out of taxpayers' pockets. And it's something which people have asked, and I think quite legitimately, why the rates and the RHI modifications have ended up in the same bill. I mean, it's also fair to say, Deputy Speaker, only 5 substantive clauses in total for both those issues. But I think it is worth remembering that one of the reasons why they are together is that the costs of this extraordinary bounty aren't just magicked out of thin air. They aren't paid for by nobody. I will take intervention in a minute. I just want to finish this point. They are paid for by taxpayers. And they are paid for by ratepayers in Northern Ireland as much as anybody else. So it is important for us all to remember the fundamental injustice which this unintentional but nonetheless very, very serious miscalculation, I'll go on to talk about what the miscalculation was in a minute, has caused. Now, there were a number of colleagues who wanted... Can I go to the gentleman from Strangford first, and then I'll go on?
I thank the Minister for giving way. Minister, in my contribution, I referred to give the example of one of my constituents. His legitimate expectation was to have repayments, and this over a 20-year period. He negotiated the bank loans accordingly as a bank, and they're very strict in the bank when it comes to borrow money. Invested somewhere in the region between $250,000 and $500,000 for some of the other constituents. So, with an expectation of a 20-year rollout, the impact upon these small businesses, these farms, family businesses will be extensive. Is it not right that should be delivered upon the 20-year long-term plan?
Mr. Speaker, I think the House would have a great deal more sympathy with those who have made out very, very well out of this. They will have a great deal more sympathy with people who have maybe not have been below the average. I think that's the point that the Honourable Gentleman from Strangford is making. While the average may be extremely high, and some people have done extremely well, even those who haven't been trying to burn their boilers all the time and live with the windows open and so on and so forth. And he gave examples of people who have not tried to do that. For those who are well below the average, for those who are worried that they are therefore going to lose out because they are well below that 50% average rate of return which has been achieved so far, then in that case, those people will still be able to opt out and they will be made good. None of the historic payments that they have received will be counted if they decide to opt out, and they will be basically told you will have a 12% return based on the money that you've invested so far. So there is a route out for people who are worried, and they will still be made whole, so they shouldn't lose out. They also won't make out extraordinarily, they won't become rich on it, but a 12% return nonetheless is something which many of us, I think, would be very happy to earn on most other investments. So the Honourable Gentleman's trying to catch my eye.
I'm grateful that the Minister's being customarily generous with this time. But look, can I say to him, though, that none of us have any brief for those who've done extraordinarily well within all this. They were lucky. They shouldn't have been allowed to be so lucky. But let's not delay beyond just determining that fact. The reality is this, is that the scheme accepts that there may be losers. And the buyout clause that the Secretary of State, the Minister, are now praying in aid is recognition of that. Now, 12% return seems quite a good return, but there is a problem with this. That the actual cost that the Minister is telling us now that will be allowable as the basis for the 12% return is not actually the same as the cost of the boiler plus installation. And that's fundamental, because what we need to have a guarantee is that people who are potential losers aren't going to see that compounded by an incompetent buyout scheme, which they will not be able to effectively, financially make work for them.
Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to be able to set the record straight. I think I mentioned this before, but perhaps I can expand on it now. The point about the buyout scheme is that it will be a 20% return. Sorry, it is minus payments already made. I misspoke just now. It's a 12% return on the capital costs of the boiler and other eligible installation and running costs. And I mentioned what those were in an earlier reply to the Honourable Lady from North Down. So that is, I think, by any standards, and it's also tailored to individual people's circumstances. So it will depend on, obviously they need to produce receipts and so on. But at that point, if you ended up paying slightly more for your boiler, then at that point you aren't going to have lost out. So it is a perfectly valid question for him to raise. I think that, therefore, the people who would otherwise potentially lose, and the Honourable Gentleman from Strangford as I said, made that point, should be kept whole. Now, the honourable gentleman was trying to catch my eye.
Minister, and I do appreciate that he is making the case that's been given to him by the department, and he, however, has touched on how do we set the average, because that is crucial in all of this. And of course he's making the case as to how it's set, but that's the basis of the calculation. The shadow leader read out a figure that the average could not be 35,000, because one of the figures that he has been given was that it cost a constituent £76,237. Other figures show that the average, and the average appears to be set in England at £44,607, and that appears to be the more general average cost of the scheme in Northern Ireland. But the department in Northern Ireland has set the average at £35,900. If the average is set wrong, the figures that the Minister has quoted tonight are out the window. The trouble is we have to rely on what the department is telling us, and we've got no evidence to rely upon it. The point that the chairman of the Select Committee made, and we should be able to challenge those figures, but we're not being given the evidence to do so.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the figures which I've been, we will have to come back to the question about how we can get more evidence into this room, as it were. I'm trying, at least during the course of my remarks here, to try and restore some of the, or answer some of the questions which were raised. I appreciate that I won't be able to answer every single question. He's absolutely right, but I'm at least trying to cover as many of them as I can. And the point which I would make for him, at least, is that the averages that I'm describing are average rates of return. Now, the rates of return will be calculated from a whole range of different things, including different capital costs, because some people have bought expensive boilers and some people have bought big boilers and some people have bought small boilers, and all sorts of other costs which are involved in both the installation and also then in fuel and so forth. But the target number is the average rate of return. And there will also, as we've already heard, be a distribution of actual achieved rates of return for each of those schemes around that average. So some people will do better than that, some people will do worse, and that's why the buyout scheme for those who are potentially going to lose out is so important. But it is also, can I just finish this point, and then I will happily give way again. It's also worthwhile just pointing out that that target rate of average rate of return, if you like, is something which is very directly comparable across the rest of the UK. So it's going to become 12% in Northern Ireland. It is 12% in Great Britain, and as I understand it, for what it's worth, and I appreciate this is of tangential relevance, but it's perhaps interesting information, the intended return of the Republic of Ireland scheme is 8%, not 12%, rather interestingly. Now, there was somebody who was trying to catch my eye just now. Sorry.
Thank you. I'm very grateful indeed. The Minister has repeatedly relied upon data and details and figures in response to a number of interventions. Could the Minister just confirm that these are not secret documents, that they're not just held in confidence within the Department for the Economy and can be made public tonight and asked to be published in the library? I would ask for the calculations to be published in the library within the next 24 hours. I think it is outrageous that we've been asked to approve a bill tonight based on facts and figures that I certainly have not had sight of, perhaps others have, but I would like them to be made publicly available in the House within 24 hours.
Deputy Speaker, there's an old saying that if you want something kept perfectly secret, you announce it on the floor of the House of Commons and nobody pays a bit of attention. And so I'm trying to put some of those facts in. I do take her point, and I will see if inspiration strikes either me later on in my remarks as to whether or not it can be done, or whether or not my colleague, the Secretary of State, can help in that regard as well. Because I think it is clear from everyone's remarks in the opening set of comments in the second reading of this debate that there is not just a thirst and an appetite, but also a genuine democratic need for proper scrutiny, for more details to be understood. That's what I'm trying to do by laying out what I'm laying out now, but I do take the Honourable Lady's point, and it's a point which other people made during their remarks too. We had comments to the same effect from the Chairman of the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee during his remarks. We had comments from the SNP spokesman, we had comments from my honourable friend, the member for Lewis, and also from the honourable gentleman for Gedling, and from North Antrim and Strangford, and I think also from East Bristol. So I completely take the honourable lady's point. So we have, I hope, dealt with quite a lot of the points. The one point which I think remains at this stage, and I'm sure we will go into more detail when we get into the committee stage in a minute, is that people have asked a little bit about the process, and it's important to remember. Oh, and I'm sorry, I should mention, Madam Deputy Speaker, before I go any further, that a number of colleagues, I think, in fact, there's clearly a movement, a political movement in East Antrim and in North Antrim, for people who are pretty leery and worried about state aid rules. Both gentlemen raised it and said, are these going to continue after we leave the European Union? I'm not sure if I'm pleased or sorry to disappoint them both, but the answer is yes, they will, simply because we have agreed to port across, to begin with at least, all EU rules into UK law, and that will include, obviously, the state aid rules. It will then, though they are both right absolutely to point out, it will then be up to this Parliament, rather than anybody else, to change them in future if we want. However, I think we all need to be a little bit careful about what we wish for, because for those of us who are free marketeers and free traders, or even those of us who aren't and just want to see fair play, changing state aid rules is something which you approach with great care, because it can easily slant the playing field either in favour of foreign firms trying to export into Britain in ways which are unfair for British manufacturers or British producers, or alternatively create political favouritism and lobbying games as well. So it's something which we would need to approach with great degrees of care, and I know will be approached with a great degree of care on both sides of the aisle as a result of that. But it is theoretically possible, but on day one, I'm sorry to tell the gentlemen from Antrim, both of them, that it will not be changed, and it will still apply. The point which I just wanted to finish on, Madam Deputy Speaker, if I can, is that, or in fact, sorry, I think inspiration has just struck. I understand that that the figures which the Honourable Lady from North Down was asking about have already been published. They were published last May, but we are trying to track down precisely where they are in order to make sure that they're properly available. So I will come back to her, or my colleague, the Secretary of State, will come back to her in order to get the final version and to make sure they are properly available. And if we can't track them down, we will try and come up with duplicates if we can. Yeah.
When the Minister, thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, when the Minister said that in fact the figures have been already published, what I really like are the calculations underlying the figures. We need to know how those figures were achieved. Are those in the public domain, or can those be put in the public domain? That's what I would like to see.
I think the answer to the Honourable Lady's question is yes, but I haven't actually seen the figures for myself, but we will endeavour to clarify that and get them out there for her as soon as we can. Can I just, as in I hadn't seen the ones that were published in May, is what I was saying to the gentleman. Can I just finish off by just saying that there is a link between the figures, between the decisions that have been taken by the executive and where we are today, because a number of colleagues have asked whether or not the sunset clause will apply if we don't take a decision today. I think there's been a question which has been raised by a number of colleagues. And I just wanted to remind people that what happened was that back in, I think it's March 2015, the executive at the time took the decision to introduce some caps. Those were, I think, renewed this time last year, roughly, and they expire at the end of March this year. And so, therefore, that is the reason why we are so concerned about the timescale. Now, this doesn't answer, I appreciate some of the questions about why are we having this conversation today rather than 2 weeks ago, whenever it might be, but I just wanted to reassure people that this is not something which someone has plucked out of the air. It is something which has been extended on a sort of annualised or fixed term basis, and therefore is due to expire at the end of this month. That's why this needs to be dealt with and sorted out, so that roughly 1,800 of those people who are currently receiving money can at least have the legal option of continuing to receive that money in future. I should just say to the Honourable Gentleman from Gedling, who was muttering in concern, when I said I hadn't seen the things, what I'm talking about is the precise figures that were published back in May. I just haven't seen those particular documents, and therefore I don't want to speak to what may or may not be in them at this stage, rather than a broader point. And with that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I will sit down and let us move on to perhaps a more detailed conversation in committee about, assuming we will agree to, in committee, about any more further detailed points about the RHI scheme, because there is clearly a material appetite to do that, and I therefore don't want to stand in anybody's way.
The question is that the bill now be read a second time. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
If the contrary no, I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.